welcome everybody to the 28th Annual Student Green Congress workshop here. We have some excellent presenters today who are just gonna wow you with their knowledge of all these really cool plants in our local area. So some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to everybody after the webinar. So if you come late or you have to leave early, that's all right. You'll get the full recording later on. The chat is open at certain points. Our presenters are going to ask you to put certain things into the chat, and the Q&A is also open. So if you have a question for any of our presenters, feel free to type your question into the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully be able to get to all of them at some point during our presentation. For now, I'm just going to let our lovely presenters introduce themselves and then take it away.
All right, well, Shechmaitsky, Inknash Winniksha, Mariana Harvey, Washnash Yakima Connect. Good morning, I'm Mariana Harvey. I'm a citizen of the Yakima Nation, and I'm the Grub Wild Foods and Medicines Program Coordinator. And I'm here to welcome you to the Northwest Tree Explorers.
My name's Kim Gaffey, and I'm so excited to spend the next hour with you. And I just want to say I'm so excited to be talking about trees because I think it's super cool that we're starting to find out, or that some people have known for a long time, but scientists are starting to realize that trees talk to each other, which I think is just totally awesome. So I'm excited to talk about trees with you during this hour.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elise Crone, and I'm a herbalist and a wild foods educator at Grub, Garden Raised Bounty. And we are with the Wild Foods and Medicines program. And I am a huge fan of trees, and they have been my refuge for a lot of points in my life. Like when I'm having a hard time, I have a couple trees that I really love and hang out with, and they make me feel better. So yeah, we're excited to share trees with you today. And some of you might have been to Grub. We are in West Olympia. We have an inner city farm and have lots of different kinds of programs. We have programs for youth. You might have been on a field trip there. We work with veterans and elders and tribal communities. And our 10 Gather Grow curriculum is what the materials that we have that we're sharing with you today are from. And we have lots more resources on our website, which is goodgrub.org, and also workshops, teacher trainings. So yeah, we would love to have you be involved. And I'm going to pass it back to Mariana.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that here, most of us, I think, are all calling in or zooming in from the lands of the Squaxin and Nisqually peoples. And Olympia is also home to other Coast Salish nations. And just want to acknowledge that these are the original stewards who are still upon these lands and actively caring for these lands. And then land acknowledgement is just the first step in what it means to be a good relative here as a guest in these homelands if you are not actually from one of those tribes. So this is an invitation for you to either continue or to start learning more about the tribes in this area, looking up their websites or looking at the different programs, museums, and things that they offer, so that we can all be in a better relationship to the original stewards of this land. I'm gonna pass it to Kim.
Okay, so we're just gonna shake it off. I know it's kind of early, and so we're just gonna play a quick game. No one will see you playing this game because we can't see you, but it's to get us in the mood for trees. And so I'm gonna ask you a question, and if it's true for you, you're just gonna stretch in some way in your seat. Like no one can see you, don't freak out, like it's okay. Just some kind of stretch. We had hoped that we'd be able to see you, but that's okay. Okay, if you have ever climbed a tree in your life, stretch. Okay, if you know the name of at least one tree in your neighborhood, stretch maybe your neck to the side. If you have ever lived in a building made of wood, maybe do a little neck roll. If you have ever eaten salmon, which is dependent on trees covering streams and keeping them cool, then do the little nose stretch, really important in the morning. Okay. If you have ever sat in the shade on a hot day, then we're going to do the ear stretch. Okay, some of you better be doing this. I'm just saying. And then this one's super important. I want you to really think about it. If you have ever used toilet paper, be honest. And we're going to stretch up again. Ooh. So all those things are about trees, like salmon and toilet paper and buildings, and all of it is about the way humans interact with trees. But the truth is, trees are just cool on their own. So we're going to find out some of that and how they interact with each other and animals during our hour together. Thank you for playing, because I know at least one of you did. Elise.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share some pictures about trees here, and hopefully you all have a kit, or very soon you're going to get a Northwest Tree Explorers kit. So this is what your kit looks like, and if you have it, get it out, because we're going to engage with this. And we have some handouts on trees, like way more than we could talk about today, but hopefully you'll get a chance to go through this later, read it. We have life cycle cards for several different kinds of trees. So they're the pages on the top right there that will help you identify trees and get to know them a little bit more. We're going to use a tree key for conifers, and there is coloring pages that you can test your knowledge about trees, try and figure out if you know what kind of trees those are. And then we'll share how to make some forest bathing salts later. So these are the things that we're going to be working with today. And if you don't have them, just follow along and you'll get your kit soon. And one of the things that we're thinking about when we're identifying trees is the tree deciduous or is it evergreen? You probably know what evergreen means, that it keeps its leaves all year long. If you know what deciduous means, maybe type it in our chat. And we're going to ask you, is this tree evergreen or deciduous? So if you can, type it in your chat or share it with students if you're at school together. All right, what do you think? It's evergreen, so it keeps its needles all year long. How about this one? This is actually at the Billy Frank Jr. Wildlife Refuge. These are cottonwood trees, and they are deciduous, so they lose their leaves in the winter. I bet you might know what kind of tree this is. If you do, you can type it in the chat and type whether it's evergreen or deciduous. This is a big leaf maple tree in the autumn, and it's just getting ready to lose its leaves, so they often will get bright yellow. So it's deciduous. And how about this one with the bent top? This is hemlock, western hemlock, and this is an evergreen. So most deciduous trees have broad leaves and hardwood. So you'll hear that a lot. Like, I'm going to go to a broadleaf hardwood forest. A lot of forests on the East Coast don't have evergreens at all. They're mostly broadleafed hardwoods. Evergreen trees are often conifers, meaning that they bear cones and they have softer wood. So a lot of our trees in the Pacific Northwest are evergreen forests, evergreen conifer forests. There are some trees that are not conifers, but they're evergreen. So you might know madrone. That's one that is common along beaches here, and it keeps its leaves all year long, but it doesn't have cones. And we'll talk more about conifers in a little bit. And here's just a picture of the cones of conifers. So when we're thinking about trees too, we look at the overall shape. So this is a great example of a fir tree that's very pointed on the top, but some trees are more shaped like an umbrella, and trees like big leaf maple might have multiple trunks, whereas a lot of trees like Douglas fir might have a single very straight trunk. So just looking at the overall shape of a tree can really help you identify it. And what is happening with tree leaves? So these are some really common terms that we look for when we're trying to identify trees. So are the leaves smooth on the edges, or are they serrated? And serrated is also called toothed. And I think about a knife, like a bread knife that you might use with a serrated edge. And lobed comes after your earlobe. So the shape lobed has kind of round lobes along it, like oak leaves you might have seen. And then the leaf shape, is it palmate like your hand? So big leaf maple and other types of maples have 5 points, and that's why it's called palmate, because of your shape of your hand. It can be simple, just a single leaf, or it can be compound and have many little leaflets as part of the overall leaf. And then see if you can find, if you have your tree samples, a sample that is needle-like. So they look like needles. See if you can find that, and see if you can find a sample that is scale-like. So some trees have leaves that look like a snake skin or a lizard back, and those are scales, but they're still leaves. Also in your samples, see if you can find a growth pattern, and this is looking at the stem of a tree. Is it alternate or opposite? So see if you can find one that has alternate leaf buds along the branch. And this is a great thing to know in wintertime. You can identify trees in winter that are deciduous just by looking at their branches and seeing, what do their buds look like? What's the orientation of how it's growing? So maybe you found one that's kind of yellowish that has alternating buds.
Okay, so we are looking at bark, and tree bark is like skin, and it protects trees from losing water, from getting diseases, or from being attacked by insects. And young bark is smooth like skin, while as the tree ages, it gets more deeply grooved and more lines, and changes like our skin, the skin of our elders, how the skin of our elder changes and looks different from a newborn baby. And each type of evergreen tree develops bark that has a different characteristic and color and texture. And we are looking at several different types of deciduous and conifer tree bark right here. Does anybody know what the top middle bark is? And you can type that in the chat. So this one right here that says it's deeply grooved. And the hint, Jasper, Douglas fir, you are right. It is a Douglas fir tree, and we often refer to it as the grooviest tree in the forest because it has such thick, groovy bark. On the top left is a western red cedar with soft, long fibers. On the top right is a western hemlock, and you notice that it has more of a gray color. And then on the bottom left is a noble fir, and I often really notice this one with the blisters that you can like puncture and the sap pitch comes running out. The middle bottom is Sitka spruce, and it has this like what we call a potato chip looking bark because they just kind of flake off really easy. And then the bottom right is the big leaf maple, which we often call like the forest hotel because it has so many other life living on it, like the licorice fern you see and several mosses and lots of other birds and insects that call big leaf maple home. So there's lots of things to look at when we're trying to identify a tree when looking at bark.
Yay! Okay, we're going to talk about alder, one of my favorite trees. So I'm assuming you all have seen this tree around because it really likes to grow in wet environments. And guess what? You all live in a wet environment. So you've probably seen these around Olympia and Thurston County. And something I really like about alders is that you always see them living in community. In a lot of ways, they're kind of all connected. Well, they are all connected underground through their roots connecting through fungal networks. And that's the way that they're able to share resources with each other and communicate. But the thing about alder, and the reason we call it a community builder, is it's not only in community with each other, but it prepares land for the next community to show up. And so alder is able to form a relationship with a bacteria called Frankia bacteria. And you'll see in this picture, there's these little nodules on the roots, those little sacs on the roots. And inside those nodules is Frankia bacteria. And what it does is it does a trade with the alder tree. The Frankia bacteria says, hey, how about you give me some food and some sugar for hanging out here? And then the Frankia bacteria pulls nitrogen from the air and turns it into a form that plants can use, including the alder. But not the alder doesn't even use all of it. So what's happening is the Frankia bacteria is actually repairing the land after a disturbance, because alder is often the first tree to show up after a fire or a landslide. It's one of the first to show up. And so often the soil is compromised, like it's having problems. And so by its relationship with Frankia bacteria, it's able to bring back the health of the soil, which means when a dug fir seed or a hemlock seed fall on the ground is actually ready for them to grow. And so alders grow about 90 to 100 years. So that seems like a long time to us, but in terms of trees, that's a pretty short-lived tree. And so alders come in, they repair the land, and then they move on to the next spot. So how do we find alders? So one way to identify alder is you can find it by its leaves. And Elise was talking about, does anybody remember what this shape of leaf is called, what the edges are called? You can put it in the chat if you remember. Oh, Kala remembered. Serrated. And so just like a bread knife, it's serrated around the edge. And then another way you can identify alder is by looking for its trunk. And it has pretty distinctive bark. So what's cool about alder is not only is it building community, but it welcomes community onto its trunk. So all of that white and blotches on its trunk is actually all sorts of lichens living on its trunk, which is cool, and it turns it white. And so they're very distinctive. When we walk into a stand of alders, it's very distinctive. So another way we can find alder is by looking up. And right now, later, when you go outside, you can probably find some alders. And right now, the way you can find them is you can see a silhouette of a tree with little things coming down off of it. And what they are these cones that we call catkins. And let's look at the one on the top right. And so that's a male cone of an alder, and it's going to produce pollen. And as it's getting ready to produce pollen, it turns this beautiful pinkish red. And so if you look up at the tops of alders, like it in general, so if you look behind that catkin up above at those trees, it looks kind of pinkish red. And then there's also female cones, which if we look at the left picture on the lower left, they start out kind of fresh and light green. And then as they develop, they turn into that woody cone. And that's how they are when they're about to let go of their seeds. And you can see the seeds in the lower right hand, and they're like teeny frisbees, the seeds of alders. And they're able to be picked up by the wind and distributed around. So something else that's super cool about alders, which I learned over the last few years, is that the inner bark of alder is a beautiful orange color. So why is that cool? Well, one reason that's cool is that we humans can actually use the inner bark to make dye. And so that lower left-hand picture is wool being dyed with alder bark, which I think is pretty awesome. And then the other amazing thing about alder, like a lot of plants and a lot of trees, it actually has medicine in it. And so we are able to take the medicine out of the roots or the bark or even the new growth buds or the catkins, and we can extract a medicine that's really good for us, and it's antimicrobial. I don't know, maybe someone in the chat can write what they think is what antimicrobial means. I'll come back to that. And then the other thing is it's really good for our digestion. So if we're having a stomach ache or we ate something kind of gross, like too much pepperoni pizza, which I love, then we could take some alder and it would help us digest a little bit. And you can take some of the bark of an alder. The best way to do it is if a branch has fallen down off the tree. You can grab that branch and you can take some of the bark off the branch, or if it's really teeny branches, you can just cut them up and you can make medicine out of the teeny branches that have fallen off of a tree, which is the best way to harvest it, is wait for it to fall off. But you can also harvest some of those catkins and other pieces of the tree, as long as you're making sure that the tree can grow after you've taken some things. Yes, and that is exactly what antimicrobial means. It means that the chemicals inside alder are able to kill bad microbes, which is microorganisms that might be hanging out in your body. And so it helps clean those up. And then lastly, I just want to say, as you're listening to all these trees, for you to think about what are ways that trees are like humans. And feel free to put something in the chat and just sit and think about it for a second. Because we think of trees as pretty different than humans, or I usually do. But what are ways that trees are actually like humans? Does anybody have ideas? Oh, yeah. They can talk, exactly. So we're learning more and more that they can actually really talk to each other through the roots. Sometimes they let off pheromones into the air that tell another tree to get ready for pests. We're learning a lot about how trees communicate. Trees breathe. And so we breathe with trees. So trees are able to breathe through their stomata. They eat, kind of, yeah, they make food. And they also, just in their structure, it's a lot like humans. They have a skeleton, it's called their heartwood. They have blood vessels, which is their inner bark. They have skin, which is their outer bark. And so I think it's important for us when we see trees to realize that they are very much like us, and that they really are our relatives, and it helps us treat them differently. That's it for me.
Thanks, Kim. This is Willow, and see if you can find in your samples, you have a weeping willow sample. So it's yellowish and long, and you might notice that it is really flexible. So that is one of the qualities of willow, is its flexibility. And not only is it flexible when you bend it, but willow shows incredible flexibility in the environment. It can live in some of the most dynamic, changing places. So here's willow growing along a river that's kind of flooding, and it's literally like in the current of the river, and it's got really deep roots and it's able to survive. And like alder, willow doesn't live usually a very long time. It has a shorter life and it grows incredibly fast. So willow can, like if this willow is in a flood and it gets its roots get pulled up or it gets damaged, it can even break off a branch, and it can release that branch. It will float downstream and it can land in the mud and root. It has a natural rooting hormone in it that will go into the mud, root quickly, and grow, and help to rebuild some of those areas where it's just been decimated by flooding. So willow is incredibly resilient and incredibly flexible. It grows in lots of different environments. It grows all over the world, and most often it grows by water. And there are a lot of different species of willow. This one right here is called Hooker's willow, but we have Pacific willow and Scowler's willow and Sitka willow that grow in our area, among others. So when Another thing I notice about this willow is that it's growing over the water. So it's helping to shade the water, and that keeps the water cool and really helps aquatic species. So people say that willow is a friend to salmon because you can envision if salmon are spawning, they might hide under this willow tree so they don't get eaten by different animals, and they need that cool water. So this is going to help shade them. And if a beaver were walking by, this is a favorite food of beavers. So the beavers are going to cut down the willow and use them to build dams. If there were deer and elk along this river, they might come and eat the willow, especially in the springtime. It's one of their favorite foods. So willows help lots of different animals and really contribute to wetlands environments. And this is a picture of Pacific willow, which is notoriously bright yellow right now. So you might notice this in wet areas or even in your neighborhood. A lot of willows will turn bright green, bright yellow during the season as their branches are growing really, really fast. So keep an eye out for different kinds of willow. And if it's bright yellow like this, it's usually a Pacific willow. And they tend to be shorter. So you can see the cottonwoods are growing much taller than the willow. And then the Douglas fir in the background is even taller than the cottonwoods. So the height of trees can help us figure out what type of tree they are as well. And here are some characteristics that help us identify willow. So the top left-hand corner is willow leaves, which tend to be simple shaped and tend to be smooth or just a little bit serrated. So just very finely toothed. And willows can be different shaped leaves, but they tend to be this shape. Some are more pointed at the tip and some more rounded at the tip. And you have probably seen pussy willows, and now is the time to notice them. That is the little flower buds that when they're really tiny, you can see them popping out of there's a little cap on top of the buds. And as that flower grows, that little cap falls off, they come out, there's a pussy willow, and then the pollen will come out of some of the pussy willows. So you'll see that on the top right, that it looks more like a flower. And that pollen will fly in the wind and fertilize the female flowers, and those female flowers turn into seeds. So the bottom right is the fully formed willow seeds, and they are going to fly away in the wind, and they can fly for miles. So you might have willow seeds landing in a muddy area, and they can sprout and grow really, really fast and help to regenerate that area. So willow is called nature's aspirin because it has medicine. It has salicylic compounds in it, very similar to what's in aspirin. And in fact, willow was used far before ibuprofen or aspirin. And that's how those remedies were originally derived, is from plants with this compound. And aspirin is anti-inflammatory, pain relieving, and it helps to break fevers. So all three of those things. And willow was the most important medicine for ancient Egyptians. Apparently they had pain and inflammation back then as well. And it's used all over the world and has been for many, many generations. It's not as commonly used now. And the reason for that is because willow tastes incredibly bitter. So you can taste willow bark, and the tea, or some people will make an alcohol extract or a glycerin extract out of it. It works really well. It just has a really, really strong taste. And when we take aspirin, usually it's coated in something that doesn't make it taste so bitter. Aspirin actually tastes pretty bad too. So if you wanted to try willow, you can strip the bark yourself. And you want to make sure you have positively identified the tree, that you're sure that that's willow, and that you're harvesting it from an area that is safe. It's not along a roadside or an agricultural area, that you have permission to be there, and that you're just taking a little bit and making sure that that willow can continue to thrive. And then you can dry it and make tea out of it. And if you don't mind the bitterness, some medicines don't taste good, it can be really, really helpful. And several different species of willow can be used for medicine. We also infuse it into an oil and use it topically for sore muscles. And elders find that it's really helpful for arthritis or sports injuries. So lots of different ways to use it. And here, if you've been to the Olympia Children's Museum, here's an example of willow's flexibility, how it was made into these incredible play structures. So willow is made into baskets and fences and sweat lodges and all kinds of things. Because of that, it's strong and it's flexible. And so you have your sample of willow. And if you don't have it now, then this is something that you can try later. This is weeping willow. So this is Lucy, who's going to show us how to make a willow bracelet. And if you have your sample, you can actually do this right now with her.
Hi, my name is Lucy, and I'm going to show you how to use a piece of willow to make a ring or bracelet. First, if you want to, you can strip the buds off because they're sometimes a little hard to weave in. Then you make it the size you want by looping it around. And then you can either pull it through like that, or you can loop it through like that. And you want to keep doing that until you have it as thick as you want, or until the end. You can always add more willow loops around it if you want it to be thicker. At the end, you just want to tuck it in one of the little loops you made, or even just tuck it around like that. If you want to tuck it in one of the loops, you just pull one out and slip it through. And then there you go, you have a willow.
All right, so you can make your own willow bracelet, and you can loop a bunch of willow bracelets together and make a willow chain. You can make a willow nest. There's all kinds of fun projects you can do with willow. And so we're just going to take a minute now to stretch. So willow reminds us that we also are flexible and strong. So if you want to stand up, whatever stretch is going to serve you right now, just take some time to move your body, because being on Zoom is hard and it helps to be flexible. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, and I just want to make a comment to my co-presenters that there is some action happening in the Q&A. So it's jump in if there's some questions that come up while I'm sharing. So evergreen conifers are resilient. And what is resilient? Resilient means that it's tough, but you keep growing. You're in tough situations or lots of challenges come up, and you're still able to move through it, to persist, and adapt is an important part of that. And one of the reasons why we say that evergreen conifers are resilient is because they've been here on this planet for over 300 million years. And so to put that into context, evergreen conifers were the primary source of food for plant-eating dinosaurs. So it's like they've been here since dinosaurs. And so they've survived through really drastic, different climate changes that we've happened. I mean, just from what you've already learned and what you can grasp, 300 million years, our planet has been through a lot, and our conifers are still here, thriving and adapting and being resilient through all of it. And there's lots of things that help them be resilient, which one of them is just their shape. So they have that triangular shape, which helps them to shed off snow. Their needles and scale-like leaves help them to be adaptive in really extreme environments, like the picture that you see, the conifers, evergreen conifers that live way up in the mountains and are covered with snow for most of the year, or even in some of the, dry areas like cliffs or even here in my backyard in Olympia, and that gets flooded all the time. So they know how to persist and adapt. And some of the other reasons why they're able to do this is they create year-round food production. So they're able to photosynthesize year-round, which is the process that trees make or plants make to gather their food and water. Yeah, and so the other reason is that they have this really amazing thing called supercooling. So supercooling is it allows for their the liquid inside of their cells to stay liquid instead of forming ice. So that allows them to be in these really cold environments and be able to withstand, because of this amazing process called supercooling in very cold temperatures. And then because of their thick waxy leaves, they're able to withstand heat. And there's so much more that we can learn from evergreen conifers that teach us about their resiliency, but those are some of our top facts. Oh, you're on mute, Elise.
Thanks. So you can identify evergreen trees by their cones because each one has a unique shaped cone. And sometimes if I cannot figure out what kind of tree it is, or the branches are up so high I can't even see the leaves, I just look under the tree and look for the cones. So you can see some tiny, tiny cones, and that's Western red cedar. And the very, very big cone is Western white pine. Some feel different, some are really hard, some are more papery feeling, like the spruce that's on the top middle. So just checking out cone shapes can really help identify the tree. And some cones point up while others point down. So this is a great thing to pay attention to, like hemlock and Douglas fir. The cones are hanging down, whereas the true firs, which is the genus Abies, so their name, each tree has a genus and a species, and the true firs all have the genus Abies, which is kind of like your last name. You share several people in your family and you all have the last name, but this one is Abies. It's actually Abies procera on the right-hand side. This is the noble fir. So that gives us the specific name for that fir. And we know it's an Abies because of those upward pointing cones that actually don't fall off the tree. They fall apart on the tree. So if I'm standing under a grand fir or a noble fir and I look under the tree, I'm going to see just a bunch of scales from the cone. And once the cone has fallen apart, then you'll just see a little stick, and they tend to be up toward the top of the tree. And birds and squirrels love to eat them. So if you're kind of, a little distance from the tree, look up at the top and see if you can see some cones pointing upward. And I always think they look like owls perched on the tree. And this is your tree key. So if you have plant samples, we're just going to practice this for a minute, and we're going to encourage you to use this later. If you've never used a tree key before, this is pretty simple. This is a very simple tree key, and you're going to start on the left-hand side where it says start here, and you're going to follow this like a pathway. So you have two choices. You're going to come to a crossroads right at the beginning there, and it says leaves like scales or leaves like needles. So if you get one of your samples and look at it and say, okay, does it have needle-like leaves or scale-like leaves? Follow that path, and you're going to come to another crossroads. So let's say you got needle-like leaves. Are the needles in clusters or are they not clustered? So you don't actually have a sample of ones that are clustered, but that would be the pines. If you pull the needles apart, you can see by the number of needles that are in that cluster, that'll help you figure out what kind of pine it is. If they're not clustered, then you're going to go to the next crossroad and you're going to look at all these different types of trees and try and figure out which one is it. So just take a minute now to choose two of your samples and see if you can figure out, not based on the pictures, but based on actually following this tree key like a pathway, because this is going to help you identify other trees if you begin to pay attention to these characteristics. So we'll give you a minute, and if you are able to figure out one of your samples, then go ahead and type it in the chat. Okay. I see Layla identified cedar. Great job. So one of your samples is Western red cedar. And so that's got scale-like leaves. And you actually can't see very well. Some of you might have the little cone and some not, but the cone is shaped like a rosebud. So if you were able to see that cone along with those scale-like leaves, you can positively identify it as Western red cedar. The other one that you might have found is Douglas fir. That one has needles that are kind of look like a bottle brush. They're not clustered. And then the cone will show you in a little bit here. So yeah, we just encourage you to use this tree key. See if you can figure out when you're in the woods some of our common tree species.
Okay, so I'm going to share about Douglas fir, which if you have it, if you have your kit, I invite you to find it. So we already established that Douglas fir is one of the grooviest trees in the forest, and their bark can be up to 12 inches thick, which lends into their ability to be adaptable because they have that thick bark that can withstand big disturbances like forest fires. Or on the left picture at the bottom, you can see that there's some black at the bottom of that tree, that Doug fir tree, which was from a lightning strike. So when they have that really thick bark, it helps them to really adapt to different things that might be happening in their environment. And Douglas fir is also the second tallest tree in the world. And it's one of our most common trees here in the Pacific Northwest. And they can grow in really different environments, from wet forest to dry cliffs. And we can move to the next slide. So evergreen conifers, including the Doug fir, can make their own medicine. And trees get everything that they need from being in one place, which is pretty amazing. And if they get injured, they don't go to the doctor like we can. When a tree is injured, it makes its own medicine, which is like a Band-Aid. And what part of the tree do you think I'm referring to? You can type it in the chat. I'm referring to what you see dripping down from the tree. Yep, the sap, the pitch. It's often called tree pitch or resin, and it's full of medicine, and it helps them ward off diseases and repel insects that might attack it. And it's just like what we said, a Band-Aid that covers up a wound that might happen. Maybe a bird was attacking, or insects, or somebody chopped off part of the tree. It'll create that pitch, and it's just like how our skin creates a scab to help heal the wound and prevent infection. And over time, the tree usually heals from that sap coming from that wound. And so, and the amazing thing is that we can also use that sap. So that sap can be, and people have used this, or actually, technically it's called pitch. So that pitch can also be used for a cut or a scrape. So if you're in the forest and you get a cut, you can actually take some of that pitch and you can put it on your wound, and maybe you take a thibbleberry leaf or some sort of leaf nearby, or a Band-Aid, and you can cover up that wound with the sap and put a Band-Aid on top, and it'll actually help your body heal from that wound and prevent infection. And pitch is also used for waterproofing or starting fires. There's many medicines and technologies that we can use from the medicine pitch of trees. We can move on. And trees can also be food, which is pretty amazing. So this is the Douglas fir tips, that bright green that you're seeing at the bottom of the branch is what we're calling the tips. And this is something that you'll notice towards the end of spring, like in May or June. And you'll also see them on other fir trees and spruce trees. And this is actually like you could eat this straight fresh off the tree. It has a really lemony, limey taste, and it's really high in vitamin C and electrolytes. So you could gather it and put it into a salad and transform it into lots of really fun recipes. And you can also infuse it into water like you see here on the right, just gathering some, put them in a jar, let it hang out in the water for a couple hours, ideally in the sun. And then that medicine from the fir tips infuses into the water. And so that vitamin C and electrolytes, and it's what we call nature's Gatorade. So oftentimes we're buying Gatorade from the store that has lots of sugar and dyes and all kinds of things in it to really get electrolytes and some vitamins. But we can also get that from the store right outside our door on our spruce and fir trees. And when you're gathering this, just keep in mind that this is the fresh growth of the tree. So we're not gathering too much from one tree. We're just sort of pruning and moving on so that we're not making a big visible impact on any one tree. And this is, yes, you can move on. And this is, so we're looking at a Doug fir cone. And you see some pitch dripping off that cone. And this is a Doug fir squirrel that loves to eat the seeds inside the Doug fir. And I'm also just going to share a short story about Douglas fir. So this story is a common Coast Salish story that I learned from Roger Fernandez from the Lower Elwha people. And it goes, a long time ago, there was a great fire. There was this huge fire in the forest, and all the animals were running to outrun the fire. And the mice were worried that they wouldn't be able to outrun the fire fast enough. So they asked the Doug fir tree to seek refuge in the huge Doug fir tree. And the Doug fir tree invited them to come up to seek refuge from the fire in their cones. And you know this story is true because you can still see on the Doug fir cones the back legs and the tail hanging out from the cone from where the mice hid and got stuck in the Doug fir cones while they outran the fire. And this story, you know, it helps with identification. If you look and see, if you're trying to remember the Doug fir tree, you can look on the ground and try to find cones and see what looks like a little mouse tail and 2 feet sticking out. And it also teaches us about, you know, that those big Doug fir trees, like more older, old growth Doug fir trees that have thick bark, can withstand fires. And we can move on to cedar. Cedar is one of our most beloved and treasured trees here in the Pacific Northwest, especially within our tribal communities. Western red cedar is also known as long life maker, rich woman maker, and grandmother cedar tree. And so I'm going to share one more story, kind of an abbreviated version of another Coast Salish story that I also learned from Roger Fernandez about the cedar tree. And it goes, a long time ago, there was a grandma cedar tree. And one day she noticed that there was a little cedar tree growing right next to her. And it was her grandson. And that grandma cedar tree loved her grandson and took very good care of him. So that when there were days when the sun beat down on that little grandson cedar tree and was threatening to dry up all of the grandson's branches, that grandma cedar tree took her big cedar branches and covered him to prevent that sun to dry him out. And when there were days when it was so windy and that grandson cedar tree was waving all around and was going to break from the wind, the grandma cedar tree took her branches and surrounded the grandson cedar tree to protect him from the wind. And when the deer would come to try to eat all the little fresh growth from that baby grandson cedar tree, the grandma cedar tree would shake her branches and scare away the deer. And when that grandson cedar tree got lonely because there wasn't any other cedar trees his age around, grandma cedar tree used her spirit powers to call the birds to sit on his branches and keep him company. And after time, that grandson cedar tree grew and grew and grew to where now that grandson cedar tree was now the biggest tree in the forest. And grandma cedar tree was getting really old. And she was so old now that when that sun beat down, it was hard for her. And so the grandson cedar tree created shade for her. And when those heavy winds came, it was so hard for her to hold herself up, so that grandson cedar tree protected her from the wind. And when the deer came at night to try to eat her branches, grandson cedar tree scared the deer away. And at this time, grandma cedar tree, she was now the oldest tree in the forest, and all the ones that were her age have gone. And so when she got lonely, grandson cedar tree used his spirit powers to call birds to come and keep her company. And grandma cedar tree said, you know what, you don't need to take care of me, grandson. I'll be okay. You can go on and just keep growing and be strong. And he said, no, you did all those things for me. You cared for me from the wind and sun and the deer, and kept me company, and I'm going to do those things for you. And so that is all. That is the story of grandma cedar tree. And what that story, there's lots of things, and I invite you to continue to think about what that story teaches you. But what are the things that it teaches us is that the generosity of grandma cedar tree, and how many gifts that it has for us to share and learn from. And I'm gonna cruise through the last few slides because we are almost wrapped up here with our time. So this is just an example of a longhouse from 1902 and a Salish woman on the waterfront, just showing all the many things that cedar can be transformed, made to it. It's our clothing, our transportation, our housing, and more. Move on. And there's lots of things that could be made from the peeled cedar bark. So you can carefully, this is a practice that Native people here in the Northwest still practice, taking some of the inner bark of the tree and transforming it into baskets and cedar hats and my earrings. There's so many things that can be made from cedar bark. And cedar is big medicine. So you can actually chop up some of the cedar leaf and you can transform it into infuse it into an oil. You can also use it as a steam. So you're seeing that on the right hand. You could take fresh or dried cedar and chop it up, pour boiling water over it in a bowl, and then put a bath towel over it. And it can really help if you're getting a cold or having any kind of funkiness, sinus stuff going on, and it can help clear that out for you, especially if you practice it, do the steam a few times a day. And then I think the next slide is Elise sharing a little bit more about your kit.
Okay, your handouts have some great directions on how to make the cedar steam and some other things. So check that out for recipes. And you got a little bag that has some forest soaking salts in it. And this is something that you could do at school or at home. Some schools don't allow any essential oils in the school. So in that case, you would want to do this at home because there is some essential oil of cedarwood and Douglas fir and spruce mixed in with your salts. And so that little plastic bag of salts, you can just break that up with your hands because salts are little crystals that are square. And sometimes if they sit, they'll get kind of hard, just like bricks locked together. So take your hands, crush those up, and then you can crush up the dried leaves of Douglas fir, cedar, and hemlock, and you just mix them together in a bowl. And then you're going to put that in your little muslin bag. And if you have a larger bathtub, you can put the whole bag in the bath and just squeeze it, and the salts are going to come out, and it's kind of like a tea. It's going to create a tree tea plus salts in the bath. That's going to help relax you and support your skin health. If you don't have a bath, you can make a foot soak. You can just take a bucket or a big bowl, and you could probably use half of the salts. You could use this twice because it would be a smaller amount of water. So just split it in half, and you can put it in there, soak your feet, and it's incredibly relaxing. So there's lots of different medicines that you can make from trees. And I just want to caution you, there's one tree that you should definitely know. When Mariana was talking about harvesting tree tips in the springtime, yew is not edible. So this is a tree to get to know. It's got a lot of amazing qualities to it. It's the hardest wood. It's got shaggy, peeling bark that's kind of reddish, and its cones actually look like red huckleberries, but its tips are toxic. So you do not want to eat yew. So try and learn how to identify that just to help with safety.
And as we finish, we just want you to think about, so the trees provide us all these gifts. You know, we talked about houses and and toilet paper, which is super important. And so what we want you to think about is what you can give back, what we can all give back. And so we've listed some ideas of things that you can do to help the trees in your community. And I welcome you in the chat to think about even bigger ideas, how we can help trees all over the world. One idea I had was that to really be conscious of the meat we eat, because a lot of meat grows in the Amazon forest, and they cut down the Amazon in order to have cows. And so thinking about where are we getting our meat and making sure we're not contributing to trees in other places being cut down. But if you have other ideas on how you can be a tree steward and give back to trees, feel free to put that in the chat, but also talk about it with students in your class and think about even just trees right outside your door. How could you help care for them? And we thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I loved all the stuff in the chat and the good questions. Thanks for being attentive. And I think Maya has a few things she wants to say to you before we leave.
Yeah, so thank you three so much for sharing all of that amazing knowledge and fun activities that we can do on our own time. I know I'm really excited. I want to make the spruce tip tea that looked really good. It looked very wholesome. So I definitely want to get out and make that at some point. Some housekeeping things as we say goodbye. Like I said, the webinar will be sent to you afterwards. So if you got here a little late, don't worry, you'll still be able to get all of the information. Thank you guys so much for participating. Wonderful questions in the chat, wonderful comments. I see lots of thank yous coming in on behalf of the students. So again, thank you three for being here and for being a very fun part of our 28th annual Student Green Congress. So with that being said, I'm going to close down the webinar. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.